Tartaria's water engines. How whole cities ran on water, not coal, sounds like fantasy, right? Then explain this. Look at old photos of industrial cities. You should see mountains of coal, black smoke, soot on the walls, workers leaving with blackened faces. But sometimes it's not there. The streets are clean, the stone is bright, and still, something is working, like the city is moving without smoke. Now, here's the strangest part. Under some buildings, people find drainage rooms. But it's not just water. It's thick pipes, carved stone channels, and mounts for wheels, like someone hid an engine underground. And when you lay the maps on top of each other, those random channels start to look like a grid. From the market to the station, from the tower to the workshops. And in some old photos, you can see a pipe feeding into a decorative tower. In one print, it's there. In another, it's carefully painted out. So, what was it really? Just a sewer system, or a network that powered whole cities without coal. Before we hit subscribe, let me show you something. London, 1889. A photograph survives in the Royal Archives. A street scene, midday. The Thames embankment under construction. You can see workers, cranes lifting stone, workshop doors open along the waterfront, steam shovels parked near the excavation, all the normal fingerprints of hard industrial work. And yet, something is wrong. The stone is pale, almost white in the sunlight. No soot streaks, no grimy smear. No coal dust settling into every crack of the masonry. The workers' clothing shows dirt from labor, yes, but not the black film you expect from a coal-burning city. Not that oily, smoky stain that clings to everything. Even the air looks clear. In almost every other photograph from that decade, Manchester, Birmingham, even smaller mill towns, the smoke is there. It hangs in the sky. It stains the buildings. Coal piles sit right in frame, sometimes taller than the roofs. You can see it on the bricks, in the clouds, and sometimes even on people's faces, but not here. The official record calls this the height of the Industrial Revolution. Steam power, coal furnaces driving the empire. Yet this image shows a city moving forward without the usual evidence that coal was burning all around it. A curator's note, typed and glued to the back of the print, reads, "Embankment works, hydraulic system installation, summer season." Hydraulic system, not steam, not coal, water. At first you might think, okay, a fountain, a decorative feature, or maybe a pumping station, just to keep the Thames from flooding the site. Reasonable. Except that same phrase shows up again and again on other big city projects from that period. Hydraulic systems installed beneath markets, beneath exhibition halls, beneath rail terminals, beneath government buildings. And the moment you try to find what those systems actually looked like, the records go quiet. So I started pulling construction logs, permits, contracts from the 1880s and the 1890s, the boring paper trail that usually explains everything. And that's where it gets strange. In Sheffield, a hydraulic service main was laid under the Central District in 1887, 14 inches in diameter, far too large for drinking water. The contract doesn't talk like a normal water line either. It specifies pressure maintenance and rotational capacity. Pressure maintenance makes sense, but rotational capacity? That is a weird phrase for something meant to carry water to a sink. In Edinburgh, the old registry lists a sub-street hydraulic distribution network connecting 32 buildings. The map survives, the routes are there, the connections are there, but the equipment inventory is missing, not lost in a fire, not ruined by time, missing. There's a clean gap in the archive box. Someone removed pages 14 through 34. In Manchester, a demolition crew in 1923 found a sealed brick chamber beneath a textile warehouse. Inside, iron gearing, a turbine-like rotor, and stone channels worn smooth by flow. The newspaper called it a curious industrial remnant, purpose unknown. The photograph that ran with the article shows workers standing beside the mechanism. One man has his hand on the turbine blades. They're thick, heavy, angled for force, built to spin under pressure. And it doesn't look like drainage equipment, it looks like a power system. Now, let's be clear. Steam engines existed, coal-powered factories. The historical record on that is solid, no argument. But what if coal wasn't the only option? What if some cities, maybe more cities than we're comfortable admitting, ran on something quieter, something that didn't leave smoke, no ash, no blackened skyline. What if water did the work? At first that sounds impossible, because when we hear water power, we picture a water wheel on a river, a mill in the countryside, small scale, almost cute. But hydraulic power is not the same thing. Pressurized water moving through pipes can turn turbines. Turbines can spin shafts. Shafts can drive belts. Belts can run machinery, printing presses, grain mills, freight lifts, ventilation fans. You don't need fire. You don't need smoke. You just need height and flow. Go back to that photograph. The clean streets, the bright stone, the workers without coal-blackened hands. Now ask yourself, if this city was running on coal, where is the evidence? And if it wasn't running on coal, what was turning beneath the streets? We're going underground next, literally. The discovery happens by accident. Vienna, 1994. A construction crew breaks through the basement floor of an old municipal building near Stephansplatz. They're installing modern plumbing. The jackhammer hits something hollow, brick, but not. Oh, the foundation, a chamber. They clear the debris. Dust hangs thick in the flashlight beams, and below, perfectly preserved, sits a room that was never supposed to exist. About 20 feet long, about 12 feet wide, walls lined with glazed brick. The floor slopes toward a central channel, stone, worn smooth, carved with precision. At one end, there's a circular mount, iron bolts still embedded in the masonry, and the metal shows rotational wear, something heavy spun here. The city sends an inspector. He photographs the space, measures the channel, notes the bolt pattern. His report files it as historic drainage infrastructure, late 19th century. Drainage. But the room sits roughly 8 feet above the water table. No sewage lines feed into it, and the channel doesn't connect to the city's waste system. Then there's another detail. On the western wall, partly hidden behind later concrete work, someone finds a valve assembly. Brass. Corroded, but intact. The threading suggests high-pressure flow. This is the kind of valve you use to regulate force, not the kind you use to simply let water pass. One of the workers, an older man who grew up near the building, mentioned something his grandfather once told him. The building used to run lifts, freight elevators that moved without motors. Hydraulic, the grandfather had said. You could hear the water moving in the walls. The crew seals the chamber, pours fresh concrete, continues the job. The inspector's report gets filed. No follow-up investigation is ordered, but the photographs circulate. And over the next decade, similar chambers turn up across Europe. Brussels, a sealed room beneath the old stock exchange. Stone channels, iron mounts, valve housings embedded in brick. Prague, 3 connected chambers under the National Theatre. Pipes thick as a man's torso running between them. The layout looks deliberate. Engineered, Barcelona, a basement space below the Mercat, de Sant Antoni. Workers find gear teeth worn into the mounting stones. Something rotated here for years, decades maybe. Each time, the official label reads the same: drainage, historic waterworks, flood control, but the details don't fit. Drainage systems don't need pressure valves. Flood control doesn't require gear mounts. And water doesn't wear stones smooth like that unless it's moving with force, under sustained pressure, day after day. These rooms feel like something else, like machine beds. So I started mapping the locations, overlaying them on old city plans from the 1880s and the 1890s. A pattern emerged. The chambers cluster beneath specific building types: markets, exhibition halls, administrative centers, workshops, places that needed power, places where machinery ran. And in almost every case, there's a secondary feature nearby. A tower, not a bell tower, not a chimney, something else. In Vienna, the municipal building sits about 200 meters from an ornamental tower built in 1887. The original architectural drawings, archived in the city museum, show a large pipe entering the tower's base, 14 inches in diameter. The notation reads, primary feed line, hydraulic distribution. In Brussels, the stock exchange is connected by an underground passage to a structure labeled Service Tower. The passage was sealed in 1921. No explanation given. In Prague, a decorative column stands in the plaza outside the National Theatre. It rises about 30 feet. No bells, no clock, just stone and iron work. But an early photograph from 1891 shows construction crews working at its base, and you can see the pipe, thick, iron, running from the plaza into the ground. A later print of the same plaza exists. The pipe is gone, retouched out, painted over, disguised with cobblestones. Someone wanted that connection hidden. So the question becomes unavoidable. If these were just drainage rooms, why hide the pipes? One hidden chamber is strange. 3 is a pattern. But when you map them all, something else shows itself. I collected every documented discovery I could find. Sealed chambers, unexplained valve assemblies, iron mounts worn smooth by rotation, 23 locations across 9 European cities. Then, I laid them over municipal maps from the 1880s. And the chambers don't scatter randomly, they align. In Vienna, 5 separate basement discoveries form a straight line running east to west through the central district. Each site sits roughly 400 meters from the next. The line ends at the Danube Canal. In Prague, the pattern is radial, 6 chambers spread outward from the Vltava River like spokes on a wheel. Each one sits beneath a major public building, each one tied into what old maps label service tunnels. And those tunnels still exist. Most were repurposed as utility corridors in the 1920s. Electrical cables now run where something else once did, but the dimensions feel wrong for modern utility work. The tunnels are too wide, 7 feet across in some sections. Vaulted ceilings, brick channels running along the floor, channels built for flow, not for hanging cable. In London, the pattern is denser. I found references to hydraulic installations beneath 47 buildings in the central districts. The earliest date is 1871. The last recorded installation is 1903. After that, city records stop mentioning hydraulic systems. They don't explain why. But when you trace the locations, they form a grid, from the Thames north through Whitechapel, west through Bloomsbury, coverage stretching across nearly 8 square miles, and at key intersections, places where multiple lines converge, you find something even more peculiar: circular basins. Not fountains, not ornamental pools. Basins with stone foundations built 12 feet below street level. Heavy iron grating on top. No statuary, no decoration, just function. An 1888 engineering survey, archived at the London Metropolitan Archives, describes one such basin near Covent Garden. Circular reservoir, 18-foot diameter, 14-foot depth, brick-lined with inlet and outlet passages. Purpose: pressure regulation for district hydraulic mains. Pressure regulation, that is power distribution language. The same survey lists 22 similar basins across the city, each one positioned at a junction point in the grid, each one connected to underground channels running beneath the streets. Most were filled in during the 1920s, paved over, built on top of. But 3 survive. One sits beneath a parking structure in Southwark. The firm that manages the site keeps it locked. Their label is simple: historic cistern, structural support, do not disturb. I requested access twice, both times denied. A maintenance worker I spoke with described it differently. He'd been down there once during a pipe repair. Big room, he said, stone channel running through the middle, iron fittings on the walls. Looked like something was supposed to connect there, something heavy. Then he added one detail that stuck with me: wear marks on the floor, grooves in the stone. Not the soft erosion you get from water sitting still. This looked like movement, repeated movement. The second basin sits in a basement near King's Cross. It's been converted into storage, boxes stacked against the walls, shelving built right into the curve. But photographs from a 2006 building inspection show the original structure still intact: circular, brick-lined inlet and outlet passages visible. The inspector's notes describe evidence of mechanical installation since removed. The third basin is under a private club in Mayfair, members only, no public access. But a 1912 photograph survives in the club's archive. It shows the basin before renovation, and you can see the details clearly: valve assemblies along the rim, pipe connections, and something else: gauge markings etched into the stone wall, measured intervals that indicate depth, and likely correspond to pressure levels. This wasn't decorative. This wasn't a fancy underground pool. This was infrastructure. So I plotted all 22 basin locations onto a modern map of London, and the pattern becomes impossible to unsee. They form a network. Each basin sits at a convergence point, each one positioned to distribute flow across multiple branches. The whole system looks designed to move pressurized water from a central source, the Thames, throughout the city. Not for drinking, not for sanitation, for power. And then, in 1903, the installations stop. No new hydraulic systems recorded, no expansion of the grid. Within 2 decades, most references to the network fade from city records entirely. Not corrected, not explained, just gone. One city with hidden chambers is a curiosity. Multiple cities with aligned grids is something else. A system. Built, used, then buried. The towers are everywhere once you start looking. Not clock towers, not bell towers, something else. They rise above plazas, near markets, beside exhibition halls. Ornamental, the records say. Decorative civic monuments put up during the expansion years of the late 1800s. But the proportions feel wrong, too thick for something that's only meant to look pretty. Bases sunk into heavy stone foundations. Interior spaces with no clear purpose. No staircases leading to observation decks. No mechanism for bells, no clockworks, no obvious utilities, just hollow cores and locked iron doors. In Antwerp, one of these towers stands in the old merchant quarter, built in 1889, about 32 feet tall. The Architectural Commission called it a monument to civic progress. There's an early photograph from the construction phase, foundation work, fresh excavation, and in that image you can see the pipe, iron, 18 inches in diameter, entering the tower, base from the north side. The excavation around it suggests it runs deep, well below street level, angled downward into the earth. The photograph is dated May of 1889. It's part of a series documenting the tower's construction, held in the Antwerp City Archives. But then there's a second print of the same plaza, taken from almost the same angle, same year, different month. And in this version, the pipe is gone. Not removed from the ground, removed from the photograph itself. Someone retouched it, painted cobblestones over the excavation, extended the plaza surface to hide where the pipe drops into the earth. The work is careful, but it isn't perfect. Look closely, and the stone texture doesn't quite match. The shadows fall wrong. The surface looks too smooth where it should look broken. So the question isn't just, where did the pipe go? It's, why was it erased? And Antwerp isn't alone. I found the same fingerprints in other cities. Lion, a commemorative tower erected in 1891 near the Old Silk District. The original construction sketches, archived in a private collection, show a water main connection at the base. Those sketches were never published. Today the tower has no visible pipe entry, but the stonework on the north face looks newer, cleaner, like a section was replaced at some point. Hamburg, a tower built beside the main railway station in 1895. Early postcards show scaffolding and excavation work. You can see workers positioning large pipes near the foundation. Then, later postcards from 1896 show the finished tower. No pipes visible. The ground around it looks finished, paved, undisturbed. Like the excavation never happened. The original images weren't burned. They weren't lost. They were simply kept out of circulation. In Manchester, a civic monument stands near the old textile district. Erected in 1887, the dedication. Plaque calls it a symbol of industrial achievement. A local historian writing in 1952 mentioned the tower in passing. He noted that during his childhood, he'd heard workers refer to it as the pressure spire. When he asked what that meant, no one could explain. And by the time he went digging decades later, the term had vanished from everyday use. But he did find one reference, a labor union newsletter from 1888, brief, almost thrown away in a single line. The new pressure spire on King Street is operational. Hydraulic service now extended to workshops along the northern route. Hydraulic service, not decoration, not commemoration, function. So maybe the towers weren't just standing there. Maybe they were part of the system. And if that's true, then the next part is even harder to ignore. Someone decided the public shouldn't see how the towers connected to the rest of the grid. In Vienna, in Brussels, in London, everywhere these towers appear, the same pattern repeats. Early construction photos show pipes. Later images show the pipes removed, disguised, or painted out. The towers remain, but emptied of their purpose and rebranded as civic art. But the foundations remember, and underneath, the channels still run. The object sits in a museum basement in Munich, not on display, not highlighted, not treated like a major piece, just stored, a heavy cast iron housing, roughly 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide. A rotor assembly is visible through the corroded casing, blades angled with precision, mounted on a central shaft. The shaft extends through both ends of the housing. Bolt holes are drilled cleanly at the ends, like connection points were always part of the plan. The museum tag reads, Pump component circa 1890. Origin uncertain, the pump component. But pumps move water from one place to another. They have an inlet and an outlet. They are built for one direction flow. This device has something else, output shafts. On either side of the housing, there are mounting points designed for belt connections. And the wear patterns are obvious, smooth grooves where leather or canvas belts once ran. Belts that carried rotational force outward, not inward. So this wasn't pumping water. This was being driven by water. A researcher at the Technical University of Munich examined the device in 2003. His report, published in an obscure engineering history journal, describes the mechanism as a water turbine designed for pressurized flow in an enclosed system. Not a water wheel, not a mill turbine sitting in a river. A pressurized turbine, built to operate inside a pipe network. And the same report points to something even bigger. Evidence suggests this type of device was once common in urban installations. Similar units have been found during demolition, work in Berlin, Vienna, and Prague, though most were scrapped before detailed documentation occurred. Most were scrapped, not preserved, not studied. Just cut up and thrown away before anyone could ask the obvious question: why were they there? I tracked down 3 other surviving examples. One is in a technical museum in Zurich, stored in the same quiet way, unlabeled in the public space, vaguely cataloged as an industrial remnant. But the hardware tells the truth. Same design language, rotor inside the housing, output shafts on both sides, belt connection points worn smooth by years of use. Another sits in a private collection in Brussels. The owner is an antiques dealer who bought it from a salvage yard in the 1980s. He thought it was decorative ironwork, heavy, interesting, industrial. When I asked if I could photograph it, he remembered something odd. A mechanical engineer once stopped by his shop, saw the device, and said it looked like a micro-hydro turbine. The dealer didn't know what that meant. He just remembered the tone. Like the engineer recognized something that wasn't supposed to be sitting in an antique store. The third example is different because it's still in place, beneath a building in Lyon, a former workshop, now converted into apartments. During renovation work in 2011, a contractor broke into a sealed service room in the sub-basement. Inside, 2 turbine units mounted in a brick chamber. Stone channels lead to each one, worn smooth and shaped for flow. Valve assemblies sit on the inlet pipes, like this was meant to be controlled, tuned, not simply left open. The contractor photographed everything before the landlord ordered the room sealed again. Those photographs later circulated on a French urban exploration forum. I found them through an architecture blog in 2019, and the turbines are intact. You can see the blade geometry, you can see the shaft mountings. You can see the belt grooves where power was transferred out into the building. One unit still has remnants of leather belting attached, cracked and rotted. But the connection points are unmistakable. People in the forum argued over what they were seeing. Some said old pumps, others said decorative machinery, maybe a display. But one commenter, identifying himself as a retired hydroelectric engineer, wrote a single, quiet sentence that cuts through all of it. These are power turbines, designed for continuous operation under controlled pressure. If the building had a pressurized water supply, these could have run workshop equipment indefinitely. No coal, no smoke, just water and gravity. The post received 3 replies, then the thread was locked. No explanation. The devices exist. They're not theoretical, not legend, not a rumor someone heard from someone else. They're sitting in basements and storage rooms, mislabeled, underestimated, ignored, and they all share the same logic. Pressurized water in, rotational force out, power. The principle is simpler than it sounds. Water has weight, and when it falls or flows from a higher point to a lower point, it carries force. That force can be captured. A water wheel does it in the open air. River current pushes blades, the wheel turns, and that rotation drives a millstone or a saw. But a closed pipe system works differently. Cleaner, more controlled. Pressurized water moving through a pipe doesn't waste energy in splashing. It doesn't leak power into spray and mist. It moves in one direction, under control, inside a sealed pathway. Then it hits a turbine, and when it does, that force becomes rotation. The turbine spins a shaft. The shaft connects to a belt. The belt drives machinery. No combustion required, no coal, no smoke, just physics. The math is straightforward. 1 cubic meter of water falling 10 meters generates roughly 1 kilowatt of power, and a flow rate of 10 liters per second through that same drop produces continuous energy, enough to run a small workshop, operate a printing press, or power a freight lift. Scale it up, and the numbers stop looking small. A reservoir positioned 50 meters above a city, feeding high-pressure mains through multiple districts, could generate distributed power at dozens of points at the same time. Each building taps the flow, extracts rotational energy, and passes the water onward to the next user. It becomes a cascade system. The water isn't used up. It drops, does work, and keeps moving. And this isn't only a theory. Real examples exist. In London, the London Hydraulic Power Company ran exactly this kind of network from 1883 to 1977. Pumping stations raised Thames water into high-pressure mains. Pipes ran beneath the streets, delivering pressurized water to hotels, warehouses, theaters, and factories. The system powered over 8,000 machines, lifts mostly, cranes, stage equipment in the West End, printing presses in Fleet Street, dock, machinery along the river. And here's the key detail. The buildings didn't need steam engines inside, no coal deliveries to every site, no smoke pouring out of each basement, just a pipe connection and a hydraulic motor. The company's own records describe near-silent operation and elimination of smoke nuisance in densely occupied districts. This wasn't experimental, it wasn't a gimmick, it was infrastructure, and London wasn't alone. In Buenos Aires, a similar system operated from 1887 into the 1960s. Pressurized water mains fed hundreds of buildings across the central city. Elevators, dock equipment, industrial machinery, all running on hydraulic power. In Melbourne, the system began in 1891. At its peak, it served over 400 buildings. Antwerp, Geneva, Lisbon. Each city built hydraulic networks in the same window of time, the 1880s and the 1890s, and each one followed the same logic: a central pumping station, high-pressure distribution mains, and localized turbines or hydraulic motors extracting power right where it was needed. The technology worked, it was proven, it scaled. So, why do most people today not even know it existed? Because the records frame it narrowly. Elevator service, dock machinery, specific applications presented like niche solutions, a clever tool for a few special jobs. But when you look at the extent of these networks, the miles of pipe, the number of buildings connected, the decades of operation, the picture changes. These weren't minor conveniences. They were power grids, water-based, distributed, and almost invisible. A city running on hydraulic pressure doesn't look industrial in the coal age sense. There's no single powerhouse belching smoke, no fuel yards stacked with coal, no ash heaps, just pipes under the streets and machinery turning quietly in basements. The buildings above stay clean. The air stays clearer. And in old photographs, the streets can look strangely bright, because that power system left almost no visible trace. The obvious question is simple. What about cities without rivers? Hydraulic power needs water, a lot of it, moving continuously. A city on a major waterway, London on the Thames, Paris on the Seine, can draw from an almost endless supply. pump it up into elevated reservoirs, then let gravity do the rest. But what about cities built inland, on plateaus, on hills, in regions where rivers run small, shallow, or seasonal? The official narrative usually shrugs and says, impossible. Those cities had to use coal. And yet, the same hydraulic systems show up there too. Madrid, built on a plateau about 650 meters above sea level. No major river. The Manzanares is barely more than a stream for much of the year, and still, city records from 1892 describe hydraulic service mains installed beneath Gran Via. The contract specifies pressure requirements, flow rates, and distribution points, but it never clearly says where the water comes from. Then there's an engineer's report from 1895, archived in the municipal library. It references elevated storage reservoirs positioned in the northern hills, 3 basins, each holding roughly 2,000 cubic meters. And the report uses a telling phrase, adequate capacity for sustained district supply. Sustained supply. Not emergency storage, not a backup for drought. Operational volume for a pressurized system that's meant to run. And the basins still exist. 2 are abandoned now, cracked, dry, and empty. The third was converted into a park fountain in the 1950s. But the original structure is still there, if you know what to look for. Heavy stonework, inlet and outlet channels, valve housings embedded in the walls. These were not decorative pools, they were pressure tanks. In Prague, the pattern repeats. The city sits on hills above the Vltava. Elevation varies by about 100 meters across the central districts. Pumping water uphill costs energy, yes, but once it's up there, gravity becomes the engine. City plans from 1888 show a network of service reservoirs positioned at high points throughout the old town. 8 locations, each one connected to underground distribution channels that run downhill into the districts below. The reservoirs are gone now. Most were demolished during the 1920s, but construction photographs survive. And those photographs show stone basins built into hillsides, covered with iron grating. No fountains, no statuary, no civic flourish. Just infrastructure. In Barcelona, the system used aqueducts, not Roman ruins, new construction. City archives contain references to covered water conveyance channels built between 1885 and 1898. The channels run from the Colzarola Hills into the city center, over 15 kilometers, too large for drinking water alone. And the engineering specs list phrases like high-volume transit, capacity, and minimal elevation loss. That's not how you describe a garden irrigation line. Those channels were built for flow, for delivery, for feeding pressure into an urban grid. Most were buried under roads during later development. A few sections remain visible in parks, mislabeled as historic irrigation works. But the dimensions tell a different story. About 3 feet wide, vaulted brick, built to carry serious volume. Then there's a third method, pumping stations. Not every city relied on natural elevation. Some built their own. In Marseille, a steam-powered pumping station raised seawater to elevated tanks in 1889. That water then fed a hydraulic network across the port district. Steam at the source, yes, but only at one location. The rest of the district received pressurized water that powered equipment without burning anything locally. In Liverpool, similar stations lifted water from the Mersey into high reservoirs and gravity distributed it from there. One central power input, distributed mechanical output across hundreds of buildings. So, the system worked in dry cities the same way it worked in wet ones. You just needed elevation, and someone willing to build the infrastructure. Stand in front of a great exhibition hall from the 1880s. Look at the stone arches, the repeating columns, the symmetrical wings stretching out from a central core. Beautiful, they say. Beaux-Arts, Neo-Renaissance. Architecture is art. But then you start noticing the proportions. The walls are thick, 6 feet in some sections, far beyond what's needed for simple structural support. The basements run deep, 2, sometimes 3 levels below the street. Down there, you get vaulted ceilings and brick-lined chambers extending under the entire footprint of the building. And the courtyards, those open squares at the center, often sit directly above cavernous spaces below. These buildings don't just hold space. They enclose systems, In Vienna, the Kunsthistorisches Museum opened in 1891, massive, symmetrical, a monument to imperial culture. The public sees galleries and marble staircases, but beneath the main floor is a sublevel most visitors never access. Service corridors running the length of the building, stone channels embedded in the floor, covered with iron grating, pipe chases built into the walls, vertical shafts wide enough to carry large diameter mains. A maintenance diagram from 1893, held in the museum's archive, labels these features as hydraulic service infrastructure. The building had freight lifts, climate control for the galleries, ventilation systems that moved air without visible fans. And the claim is this: it ran on pressurized water delivered from a central reservoir about 2 kilometers away. So, the museum wasn't just a building, it was a machine wrapped in stone. And the same design language shows up across Europe. Grand, railway terminals, market halls, government buildings, thick walls, deep basements, repeating arches that aren't only decorative, they hide ducts, channels, and service routes where air and water can move unseen through the structure. In Brussels, the Palais de Justice, completed in 1883, covers 26,000 square meters. The basement level holds a network of brick vaults and passages. Modern building surveys often describe them as storage areas, but the layout suggests something more deliberate. The passages connect. They form a grid beneath the building. Stone channels run along the floor. Valve niches are built into the walls at regular intervals, like connection points meant to be accessed, serviced, controlled. One engineer, reviewing the space during a structural assessment in 2001, wrote, "The subsurface architecture resembles a distribution system more than simple foundation work. A distribution system, not decoration. Not accident. Design." In Barcelona, the Mercat de Sant Antoni, built in 1882, features a central courtyard surrounded by market stalls. That courtyard sits above a vast basement space. Brick pillars support the structure, but between them you find channels, mounting points, and the scars of machinery long since removed. The market had lifts for moving goods between levels, ventilation that kept air moving even in summer, refrigeration chambers said to operate without electricity, hydraulic refrigeration, water circulating through insulated pipes, pulling heat away from storage rooms. The principle is simple: evaporative cooling and controlled flow. It works. And it would explain why some of these markets could store perishable goods year-round in an era before electric refrigeration became common. The point is bigger than any one building. These structures look like monuments because we're trained to see facades, but the blueprint logic underneath is closer to a machine. The grand arches, the ornamental towers, the symmetrical wings, all of it can be functional. Architecture that hides infrastructure. Today we walk through them like they're frozen art, but they were built like engines, stone shells housing invisible networks of power, motion, and control. And when you move through them now, the bones are still there, the channels beneath your feet, the chases in the walls, the basement vaults that once hummed with flow, silent now, but not gone. The pattern doesn't stay in Europe, it crosses oceans. Melbourne, 1890. The Royal Exhibition Building rises in Carlton Gardens, dome, arches, stone facade, and beneath it, a basement network later described in heritage surveys as unusually extensive for a building of this type. Channels run beneath the floor, pipe chases climb through the walls, and in the original construction plans, there's a blunt notation: hydraulic service mains, connection to city. Reservoir. The building ran lifts, ventilation, and stage machinery, all hydraulic. Buenos Aires, the Palacio de Aguas Corrientes. Completed in 1894, the name translates to Palace of Running Waters. Official purpose: water purification and distribution for the city. But the building's design is excessive for that job alone. 3 stories, ornate tile work covering what should have been a purely industrial shell, and inside, turbine rooms. Not just for pumping water out to homes, for generating rotational power. The building had workshops, equipment bays, machinery that could run without local steam. Pressurized water came in from elevated tanks. The system distributed water locally, extracted energy, and then sent the flow onward into the municipal supply. Dual function: power and distribution in one structure. In Cape Town, the old granary building, original construction in 1813, expanded in the 1880s, shows similar features: deep basement, stone channels, valve assemblies discovered during a renovation in 1998, and the expansion phase lines up with the city's installation of hydraulic town mains, documented in Cape Municipal Records from 1887. Then the pattern shows up in North America. Philadelphia, the Fairmount Water Works, operating from 1815 to 1909, used water turbines to pump drinking water to the city. That part is well known. But surrounding the main facility are auxiliary buildings connected by underground passages. Service records mention mechanical power export to adjacent mills and workshops. Power export, meaning the water wasn't only being lifted for drinking, it was driving machinery beyond the waterworks itself. In Montreal, the Lachine Canal system, dug in the 1820s, expanded in the 1870s, provided hydraulic power to factories along its length, over 20 mills and workshops, and connected directly to the canal through turbine installations. And the system operated into the 1960s. But most historical accounts frame it as canal-based industry, not as an urban power grid. That framing matters. Call it a canal, and it sounds small. Regional, old-fashioned. Call it a distributed hydraulic power network, serving an industrial district for 90 years. And the scale shifts immediately. In Sydney, exhibition buildings from the 1870s show basement infrastructure that resembles the European examples. Channels, mounting points. Construction records with the same dry phrase, hydraulic installations. In Johannesburg, early municipal buildings from the Gold Rush era contain similar features, even though the city was founded in a region with limited surface water. So, the system adapts. Elevated reservoirs, pumping stations feeding pressure mains, local distribution to buildings that needed rotational power, different continents, different languages, different governments, but the same design principles, the same kinds of spaces, the same kinds of components, and the same timeline, the 1870s through the 1900s. Then, in most cities, the same ending. Records go quiet after the turn of the century. New construction stops mentioning hydraulic service mains. Existing systems get decommissioned, filled in, sealed, or relabeled. So, the global pattern isn't only adoption, it's erasure. Everywhere, almost at once. The end doesn't arrive with one clean announcement. It comes in pieces, scattered records, missing pages, dates that don't line up. In Vienna, municipal records from 1887 describe the installation of hydraulic service infrastructure throughout the central districts. Detailed contracts, engineering specifications, projected expansion into neighboring zones. Then, in 1911, there's a single line entry: hydraulic mains, District 4, decommissioned. No explanation, no technical failure listed, just one word: decommissioned. The following year, another entry: District 6. Same note. By 1918, all references to active hydraulic distribution stop appearing in the city ledgers. Not repaired, not upgraded, not replaced, just silence. In London, the pattern is slower but just as strange. The London Hydraulic Power Company keeps operating well into the 20th century. The network expands until 1903. Then, expansion stops. No new connections after that date. The system continues serving existing customers, but the growth ends like someone turned off a tap. And when you look at the company records from that period, the tone changes. Reports get thinner. Financial statements become vague. Engineering updates fade out of the annual filings. In 1977, the company shuts down entirely. The official reason is a bland word: obsolescence. But the pipes are still functional, the pumping stations still work, and some buildings keep using hydraulic lifts into the 1980s, drawing from private water sources after the mains are closed. So, the system didn't collapse. It wasn't broken. It was ended. In Barcelona, demolition records from the 1920s describe the removal of obsolete hydraulic infrastructure from buildings across the Eixample district. Obsolete. Yet those same buildings are fitted with electric systems that perform the same jobs: lifts, ventilation, machinery. And the replacement happens fast. Within a decade, most visible traces of the hydraulic grid vanish. Then there are the floods. In 1910, Paris suffers severe flooding along the Seine. The water rises, damage spreads through the lower districts, basements fill. Reconstruction begins immediately. But the rebuilding record shows something that shouldn't be there. Buildings that had hydraulic systems documented in their original construction plans are rebuilt without them. Basement layouts change, channels are filled in, pipe chases are sealed. A city engineer's report from 1912 mentions modernization of subsurface infrastructure in flood-affected zones. Modernization, not repair, not restoration, replacement. That same year, in Manchester, a basement fire in a textile warehouse leads to a partial collapse. During debris removal, workers uncover extensive hydraulic apparatus beneath the building, and the equipment is intact, undamaged by the fire. A newspaper article from March 1912 quotes the salvage supervisor. "The machinery appears functional, though its purpose is unclear. Functional, and still it's scrapped. No preservation, no deeper inspection, no study, gone." In Prague, the archives tell the story in a different way, by what isn't there. Engineering records from 1895 to 1904 are missing. The catalog lists them clearly, volumes 12 through 18. Subsurface infrastructure reports. They aren't checked out. They aren't misfiled. They're absent. An archivist's note dated 1954 states, "Material removed prior to current cataloging system. Origin and reason unknown." So, the records existed, and then, at some point, they didn't. In Brussels, there's a similar gap. Construction permits for hydraulic installations are complete through 1899. From 1900 to 1906, you get A. Scattered entries. Then, after 1906, nothing. Not because the system stopped existing. Building surveys from the 1930s still mention sealed hydraulic chambers and decommissioned water mains during basement inspections. The systems were there, but the paperwork starts pretending they weren't. So something happens between 1900 and 1920, not in one city, across all of them. A coordinated shift, hydraulic infrastructure decommissioned, records thinned out, removed, or quietly buried, replacement systems installed, and the official explanation, when you can find one at all, always uses the same word: progress. Progress has a price, and someone always pays it. In Whitechapel, London, a workers' cooperative ran a small printing press from 1889 to 1914. The shop operated on hydraulic power, a single motor connected to the city mains, driving the press, the binding equipment, and the cutting machines. The monthly cost was simple: 4 shillings for water service, no coal to buy, no boiler to maintain, no smoke choking the workspace. Then, in 1914, the hydraulic mains in that district were shut down. The cooperative received a notice: convert to electric power or cease operations. Electric service meant new wiring, a transformer installation, new hardware, and monthly costs that were triple what they'd paid for hydraulic service. The shop couldn't absorb it. They closed in August of 1914. A worker's diary, donated to the Tower Hamlets Local History Library in 1973, contains an entry from that month. 26 years we ran clean. No soot on the pages, no coal dust in our lungs. They say this is progress, but it has put 15 men out of work. And that story doesn't stay in one neighborhood. It repeats across industrial districts. In Manchester, a textile workshop relied on hydraulic power for looms and ventilation. When the local hydraulic system was decommissioned in 1921, the workshop converted to coal-fired steam. A health inspector's report from 1923 notes a sharp increase in respiratory complaints among workers at that facility. Air quality degraded. The workspace, once clean, now carried the residue of coal smoke. Progress. In Vienna, entire neighborhoods were rezoned during the 1910s. Buildings that had run on hydraulic service for decades found their basements sealed and their connections severed. Residents were relocated. Some buildings were demolished outright. City planning documents from 1913 describe this as infrastructure modernization and slum clearance. But photographs from before the clearances show well-maintained stone buildings, clean streets, no visible decay, no collapse, no rot, no obvious crisis. So, the clearances weren't about structural failure, they were about removing a system. In Barcelona, canal workers lost their positions when covered hydraulic channels were filled and paved over in the 1920s. These weren't sewage workers, they were system operators, men who maintained flow rates, cleared blockages, and monitored pressure, skilled labor. A municipal employment record from 1924 lists 127 hydraulic service technicians removed from the city payroll between 1920 and 1923. Removed, not retired, not transferred, gone, and some trades didn't just shrink, they disappeared. Hydraulic engineers, pressure system specialists, turbine mechanics who knew how to balance rotational loads across distributed networks. By 1930, those skill sets were effectively obsolete. The knowledge didn't transfer cleanly to the new electric systems. The principles were different. The infrastructure was incompatible. An entire generation of expertise lost. In Buenos Aires, a hydraulic lift operator named Ernesto Villanueva kept a personal journal. In 1935, he wrote, "They tell us the new electric lifts are safer, faster, better. But I have operated hydraulic lifts for 22 years without a single failure. The system was reliable, it was quiet, it worked. Now I am too old to learn the electric systems and there is no place for me." He was 51, and that detail matters because it cuts through the official story. The systems didn't fail. The people who depended on them were simply left behind. Workshops closed, jobs vanished, skills became irrelevant. And the records frame it as inevitable. The march of progress. But progress for whom? The workers didn't ask for coal smoke. The shop owners didn't request higher operating costs. The neighborhoods didn't demand their infrastructure be ripped out and replaced. It happened to them, not for them. The system didn't vanish completely. Pieces remain. In central London, metal grates sit embedded in the sidewalks, small, circular, easy to miss. Most pedestrians step right over them without a second thought. But beneath those grates are channels, brick-lined passages running under the streets. Too large for modern drainage, too carefully built for simple runoff. A 2003 infrastructure survey conducted during underground expansion work mapped many of these passages. The report describes them as repurposed Victorian-era conduits, origin and original function uncertain. Repurposed. In the 1920s, many of these channels were converted into storm drains. Water still moves through them. Rainwater now, not pressurized mains. But the engineering is still there. Stone-worn smooth by decades of flow. Valve niches built into the walls, now empty. Junctions where multiple channels converge. The bones of the system. In Vienna, a building restoration in 2017 uncovered something no one expected. A contractor removing a false ceiling in a ground-floor commercial space found a sealed shaft running vertically through the building, brick-lined, about 8 inches wide. At the bottom, a valve assembly, corroded but intact. At the top, an outlet that once fed equipment on the upper floors. The building's original plans, archived at the city planning office, label it a hydraulic service column. The shaft was never ripped out. It was simply hidden. The contractor photographed it, then sealed it again behind new drywall. In Barcelona, old market halls still have iron floor grates. People assume they're decorative, part of the historic character. But those grates aren't decoration. They cover channels. A maintenance worker interviewed in 2015 described what lies below. Stone troughs, old iron pipes, all still down there. We use the space for electrical conduit now, but you can see the original system, built heavy, built to last. Some basements weren't demolished at all. They were just locked. In Prague, several buildings in the Old Town have sub-basement levels marked restricted access, structural support only. Structural support. But a building inspector granted entry during a 2008 safety review reported something else. Intact hydraulic apparatus, including valve assemblies and what appears to be a small turbine housing. The equipment is non-functional, but well preserved. His recommendation was blunt. Preserve in place. Keep restricted access, so the basement stays locked. In Brussels, an urban exploration group documented a sealed chamber beneath the Bourse in 2012. They reached it through a forgotten maintenance tunnel. Inside, mounting brackets on the walls, channels carved into the floor, iron doors that once connected to adjacent spaces, maybe even adjacent buildings. The chamber spans the width of the structure. It wasn't storage, it was operational space. The photographs circulated online. Briefly, then the access point was sealed with concrete. Even fountains tell the story. Old public fountains, the ornamental kind in city squares, often sit above basins built far deeper than you'd ever need for decoration. In Zurich, a fountain restoration in 2009 required draining the basin. When workers climbed down to repair the stonework, they found valve fittings embedded in the foundation, heavy-duty fittings, built for pressure regulation. So, the fountain wasn't always just a fountain. It had been part of the grid. After the hydraulic network shut down, the basin was repurposed. Water still flows today, but now it's purely aesthetic. The infrastructure beneath didn't disappear. It adapted. It survived. Railway stations preserve some of the most intact examples. Service tunnels beneath platforms, freight passages that connect to street level, rooms with mounting points and pipe chases that no longer have a clear modern purpose. At St. Pancras Station, in London, a basement tour shows channels running the length of the building. The guide calls them historic drainage works. But the wear pattern suggests something moved through those channels under force for years. So the city still carries the system, hidden, repurposed, forgotten, but not gone. Walk through any old city center today. Look at the grand buildings from the 1880s, the exhibition halls, the market structures, the railway terminals. Notice how clean the stone still looks in old photographs. Notice how rarely you see coal piles sitting in the frame. Notice the workers without blackened faces. And ask yourself, if this was the height of a coal-powered industrial revolution, where is the coal? The conventional story is simple, clean, linear. Coal powered the 19th century. Steam drove industry. Then electricity replaced steam. Progress marched forward, but the evidence under the streets points to something messier and harder to ignore. Sealed, chambers with turbine mounts, channels worn smooth by pressurized flow, valve assemblies built for regulation, not drainage, towers with retouched photographs that hide pipe connections, a grid that spread across continents, ran for decades, and then got decommissioned within a single generation. Not because it failed, because it worked. We have proof that systems like this were real. The London Hydraulic Power Company operated for 94 years. Melbourne's network ran into the 1960s, and buildings across Europe kept functional hydraulic equipment long after the mains were shut down. The technology wasn't fragile. It wasn't a dead-end experiment. It was sound. So, why did it disappear? The answer doesn't feel technical. It feels economic, political, structural. Hydraulic power was distributed, local, hard to meter precisely, hard to package into a single bill with a single owner. A building with a turbine in the basement and a connection to city mains could create its own rotational power. No fuel purchases, no constant deliveries, no dependency on coal yards, boiler contracts, or electric utilities. Centralized power is easier to control. Coal plants, electric grids, systems where generation happens at one point and consumption is metered somewhere else. That model favors consolidation. Ownership. Profit. Distributed hydraulic networks favored independence. And independence doesn't build empires. The records don't say this out loud. You won't find a memo that reads, "Dismantle hydraulic systems to establish energy monopolies." But you don't always need a memo when you have a pattern. The same decades that saw hydraulic systems decommissioned also saw the rise of centralized electric utilities, the expansion of coal industries, the consolidation of power generation into fewer hands, owned by larger and larger interests. It doesn't look accidental. It looks structural. Now return to that photograph. London 1889, clean streets, bright stone, the Thames embankment under construction, labeled hydraulic system installation. That world existed, not as fantasy, not as rumor, but as iron, brick, and pressurized water moving beneath the streets. Can we prove every claim with absolute certainty? No, Some records are gone, some chambers remain sealed, some questions have no final official answer. But the pattern is still there. Cities ran on water, quietly, efficiently, without smoke. Then that system was removed, buried, relabeled, erased from the common narrative. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well, and the world that replaced it needed us to forget. Maybe history didn't lose this story. Maybe it simply decided a simpler version was easier to sell. Coal, steam, progress, clean, linear, inevitable. But beneath your feet, in cities across the world, the channels still run, the mounting points remain, the evidence waits, and the question doesn't go. Yahweh, what else did we bury?